Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's event, Harnessing the Superpower of SOC Automation. This is presented in partnership with Rapid7, and we're looking forward to a very robust and dynamic discussion today. My name is Scott Lowe. I'll be your moderator for today's event, and we'll get started with some introductions in just a minute. I also want to mention some things about questions. We have an opportunity for you to ask great questions of today's expert presenters on this topic. If you'd like to use the QA button in your console, you can ask any question you like, and it might be worth $50, which I'll talk about in just a second. But we encourage you to ask any question that might be on your mind, because if you have the question, chances are someone else does as well. Also, handouts. We have a number of assets. We have an asset from Rapid7 that you'll see in the handouts tab in the QA panel. That's something we should encourage you to download and take a look at. You'll also see information about the Gorilla Guide Book Club from Actual Tech Media, the full Actual Tech Media events calendar, and the all-important prize terms and conditions for the next part of the segment here, which is about the prize. At the end of today's event, we will be awarding an Amazon $300 gift card to one lucky person. But you also have an opportunity to win a $50 Amazon gift card just for asking the question that's on your mind. We want to encourage people to ask questions because it leads to a much more interesting and immersive discussion with our presenters. So if you ask the best question in our sole judgment, you can win a $50 Amazon gift card. We will contact the prize winner after today's event. Winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize policy as well. If you're listening to this event on demand, please know that these gift cards were already awarded and they are no longer available. But since those of you right now are live, you are eligible. We have some great speakers today. We have Margaret Wee, who is the Product Marketing Manager for Detection and Response at Rapid7, Sydney Cafaro, who's Senior Technical Advisor for SOAR at Rapid7, and Jeffrey Gardner, Practice Advisor Detection and Response with Rapid7. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Margaret, Sydney, and Jeffrey.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we're really excited to talk with you about SOC automation with Rapid7's Cloud SIEM Insight IDR and our SOAR solution Insight Connect. So we're going to start off by going through a brief introduction to both Insight IDR and Insight Connect, and then we're going to wrap it up with some SOC automation use cases and a product demonstration. So like Scott said, we'll have a Q&A at the end, so please feel free to ask questions as we go. So before we dive into it, we will kick it off with some introductions. Sid, I'll pass it to you to kick us off.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Margaret. And again, it's a pleasure to be talking to everybody today. I'm Sydney Cafaro, and I'm a technical advisor for Rapid7 SOAR solution Insight Connect. Really at its core, I work with customers every single day in the security realm, just like yourselves, to understand how to deploy automation and to actually go ahead and help them do so. So really excited to share with everybody today how automation can really start to bring impact to your organization.
Awesome. With that, I'll hand it Sorry, Sid, thanks. So I'm Margaret. I'm a product marketing manager for our detection and response offerings. I work really closely with our product, sales, as well as some other teams here internally at Rapid7 to really determine a go-to-market strategy that's centered around customer needs and goals and how we can best support those with our products and services. And Jeff, I'll hand it off to you.
It's so weird calling you Margaret. I'm going to have to mentally remind myself to do that. But thank you, Margaret. So I'm Jeffrey Gardner. I'm a practice advisor here at Rapid7 for the detection and response practice. What that basically means is, I've spent my whole life being a practitioner in roles from an analyst to a CISO, from startups, Fortune 500s, military, government, taking all that experience and kind of being a subject matter expert and making sure we're driving, positive customer outcomes, making sure we're building products that, the people actually want to use, as opposed to being engineering driven. We're more customer driven. So it's kind of like a brief snippet of what I do here, but I will pass it back to, it's going to be so weird, Margaret, to get back into the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeffrey. So to start us off, I wanted to set the scene for really how we approach security here at Rapid7. So we're focused on advancing security with visibility, analytics, and automation delivered through our Insight Cloud products, which you can see here on this wheel on this slide. So our approach really simplifies the complex and helps security teams to reduce vulnerabilities, to monitor for malicious behavior, to investigate and shut down attacks, and then to automate routine tasks. So overall, our Insight Cloud products really just enable your teams to work faster and smarter. So today we're going to be focusing on the detection and response and orchestration and automation sides of things, but I just wanted to call out the greater Insight Cloud before we got started. So kicking things off, I wanted to discuss the overall problem that we're trying to solve here with detection and response and orchestration and in automation here at Rapid7. And that is how security teams are facing more complexity than ever before. So the job is getting harder and more complicated. Meanwhile, the security skills gap is continuing to widen. And we hear this on repeat again and again from our customers, prospects, or industry professionals, and it prevents itself in a variety of ways. So first, to the far left here, like I just mentioned, just that overall resource gap that continues to grow. So while this concept isn't necessarily new, the past year has definitely made the job of a security professional even more difficult in a relatively short period of time. So the industry was already experiencing a skills gap, and we're seeing that really play out in a few different ways, from analysts spending a lot of time on non-security work like operational infrastructure management, to there just being a general need for developing talent to keep up with that ever-changing security stack. Next, teams have a ton of security solutions deployed to try and keep up with the accelerated threat landscape and attacks. So that leads to this constant context switching as analysts jump between several different tools to get that holistic view of their environment. And this, of course, is not very efficient for teams. And this kind of leads into the next point here. The significant increases in remote work and cloud application adoption over the past year have only expedited growth for the already fast-growing security landscape and attack surface. So this accelerated growth is bringing new security challenges. Not only is there now more to keep track of and monitor, but security teams are often left trying to monitor these modern environments with outdated security solutions. And even if an organization does have a newer security stack, they're generally scattered point solutions, which again leads to this constant context switching between multiple tools. And then lastly, in this modern security environment that happens to be really spread out and taking in a lot of data and information, alerts are just really noisy. So like I mentioned when speaking about that accelerated attacks, as teams are really trying to get visibility, a lot are using multiple tools to try to stay on top of everything. And this ends up producing a constant flood of event data. And this creates a ton of work for security teams who have to sift through this really high volume of alerts. And when a large amount of these alerts, 45% of them, as you can see here, turn out to be false positives, it just really takes away from the time that should be spent on real threats. So overall, it's just getting harder to keep up with all of this. The volume of threats, the noise, the amount of data, these issues coupled with the fact that the security industry as a whole is just really understaffed, it's no surprise that a majority of security professionals are getting burnt out. So at Rapid7, our goal is to eliminate the complexity that gets in between security teams and successful detection and response. And we do that in a variety of ways with our core solutions. So Insight IDR in the center here is really the flagship of our detection and response portfolio. As a natively cloud SIEM, Insight IDR provides customers with visibility across their entire environment, early and reliable detections out of the box, as well as high context investigation and response tools to really help teams respond quickly and confidently to threats. We also have a managed detection and response service, which provides customers with around-the-clock monitoring from our global expert SOC team. So this team also curates a robust library of out-of-the-box detections for Insight IDR, which really provides built-in expertise for customers. So this means even if you're only using Insight IDR, you're still benefiting from the expertise of our MDR team through our alerting. And then in addition to Insight IDR and MDR, we also have Insight Connect, which is Rapid7's SOAR solution. And Insight Connect provides pre-built automation workflows directly in Insight IDR to maximize efficiency for teams. So Sid and Jeffrey are going to get into this a lot more, but really the best solution to those industry-wide detection and response struggles that we talked about earlier is to increase efficiency by using SIM and SOAR together. So using those two solutions together really allow for SOC automation, so that process of automating and optimizing your security program. So I'll stop there and pass it off to Sid and Jeffrey to let them dive into Insight Connect and how it works with Insight IDR to deliver automation to drive successful, efficient detection and response for teams.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Margaret. Moving on to the next slide, really what I want to focus on is the SIM and SOAR piece. So as Margaret just mentioned, Insight IDR is really focused on addressing those core customer problems of lacking visibility, experiencing alert fatigue, and overall just needing to respond faster. Now, what's going to help you do this is Insight IDR was built natively in the cloud. So as a SaaS offering, Insight IDR scales really effectively for customers to deploy, host, and continue ongoing managing Insight Connect and Insight IDR very easy on the Rapid7 Insight platform. Now, our core principles behind the product is to help analysts become more effective and more efficient as they tackle threat detection and response. But the way that we do this is first, Insight IDR unifies diverse data sets across a lot of different environments. So that way we can take it a step further by applying correlation, enrichment, attribution, and ultimately all that data turns into insights. Driving early and reliable detections with behavior and attacker analytics is of course part of the visibility that teams can begin to leverage. But then of course having very rich, highly contextualized investigations and automation to help you respond quickly and effectively is key as well. But the need for automation doesn't just end there. More and more security teams are leveraging standalone automation solutions to eliminate redundant manual processes, expedite response, and even accelerate operations, not only within the incident response space, but also in other core areas as it relates to managing cloud, vuln management, and a variety of other areas. So with that being said, Insight Connect is Rapid7's standalone SOAR solution, which enables teams to accelerate and streamline time-intensive processes with little to no code. So with significant time savings and productivity gains across overall security operations and teams, they can really start to maximize the amount of time that they can use effectively. Now, of course, this is just a theoretical background around Insight Connect, but really I want to apply more context by having Jeff jump in and just tell us a little bit about how he started to leverage not only SIM, but SOAR together back when he was CISO in his past organizations.
Sure. Thanks, Sid. So, one of the first things that I, at the executive level, would always, look at would be risk and cost. Because when you get up to the board or to the C-levels, things really kind of boil down to those two things. So, how is it going to impact, the bottom line, and how is it going to reduce the risk that the organization faces? So in terms of, and they do go together. So in terms of cost with things like incident response and with SOC and SIM automation, it's going to be, what's that cost per investigation? Because that's a combination of, the mean time to detect, the mean time to respond, doing all the paperwork, putting in all the tickets, writing notes, all of that actually has a personnel cost. It's, some people consider it like a sunk cost, but it's still, a cost to the organization. And then, looking at the risk posture, minutes matter when it comes to incident response. So, the quicker you can close these incidents out, reduce dwell time, that's reducing the risk, but also dealing with false positives and dealing with all that investigative work, that's increasing risk because you may be missing, kind of like the needle in the haystack of needles is like something I like to say. So if you can reduce that, you're also reducing risk. I loved, Sid, how you said, it's growing beyond just, incident response and the SOC, because that's one of the things that I always used to tell my people when they were bringing things is, who else have you involved in the organization? Can IT use this? Can other parts of the organization do this? And really with orchestration, that's where that comes into play. So, I mean, I'm sure everyone out there that's listening has, a set of SLAs that they have to respond to when it comes to users. That's actually one of the first things that I like to tackle when I'm starting to implement, orchestration and automation is if you have an SLA for responding to requests from users about a phishing email, or if we're doing a security review of a program, hardening servers, whatever that kind of stuff may be, that all ties in. And that's a great way to kind of evangelize the benefits of SOAR throughout your organization and get IT on board, get HR on board. And that's when you start building that momentum going forward and building excitement around it. And then you'll really quickly find it takes off in a way that you weren't expecting. Because once people see the power of this, they'll all want in because it will just greatly increase their efficiency. So I know I kind of babble on and get really manically happy when I start talking about this stuff. So I'll pass it back to Sid.
No worries. That was really good context, Jeff. And I think that you started to call out some of our most common use cases. So just to reiterate, especially when it comes to SOC automation, again, leveraging SIM and SOAR together, some of the first places we start to see customers begin automation is first, just customizing alert pathways. Instead of requiring the team to have to log into your solution, how can automation escalate alerts to where you're already working? Perfect examples could be escalating alerts from your SIM into chat op solutions like Microsoft Teams or Slack. This can also in turn start to improve the visibility across team and improve cross-team collaboration. Also, investigating alert enrichment or investigation enrichment is also one of the key areas that's currently done today manually. So if you find yourself copying and pasting IPs, domains, hashes, URLs from your alerts into any other threat intel source, know that some of the low-hanging fruit that you can begin to use automation for today. So that way you can better focus your time in other areas. Now, once we have the containment piece down, also we can start to talk about containment. So after we've enriched our alert, now we can start to take action if one of those alerts does in fact look like to be a threat by locking down the suspicious user account that's associated, by quarantining the asset that's associated, or even by updating a firewall policy off the fly. So really, that's another core concept to automation. And I would even mention that it's very important to also start to automate the reverse of those actions. So even though automating containment can start to reduce your mean time to response, automating the reverse of those actions can reduce the mean time to business continuity and getting the business back up and running. So some very important elements when we talk about user asset and I like to call firewall containment. But the last piece is if your team's currently struggling to get 24-hour monitoring, if you have a guy in your team working a graveyard shift, just know that instead of doing that, you can start to automate responses off of alerts that come in during out of office hour times. All of these different use cases can start to give you a number of different value points when it comes to improving your security posture, but also improving your customer satisfaction and hopefully, giving the team back some time in their day and really expanding your coverage.
I love how you tied that together with bringing back it to business continuity, because that's, if you look at the incident response life cycle, and I'm going to go based off SANS model of incident response because I'm familiar with that. Preparation is always the mode that you're in. A lot of people tend to concentrate on identification, containment, and then eradication, and then they kind of stop there and they leave off recovery and lessons learned. Those should be part of your workflows as well. And you can get really creative with things like if you have a backup and recovery solution in the cloud that has API access, you can start automating file recovery. Kind of the limit is your imagination when it comes to orchestration and automation. So if you have processes that take recovery and lessons learned into account, like documenting things, you can start to automate all of that and really unlock the power of this stuff in a full 360-degree view of that incident response lifecycle. So it's great that you call that out.
Awesome. Yeah, no problem. And curious to get everybody else's feedback as some of those questions come in as well. Perfect. Well, with that being said, we try to keep our slideware down to a minimum, but I think we're ready to hop on over to the demonstration side of things.
Awesome.
Perfect. So with that, we'll go ahead and hop on in
today for Rapid7's demonstration of our SOC automation solution, combining the powers of Insight IDR, Gartner's leading UBA SIM, and Insight Connect Rapid7 SOAR solution. First, we're going to take a dive into Insight IDR, review some of our attacker and then also user behavior analytics, and discuss how we can start to detect notable behaviors that then envelop into new alerts and help you drive response within your security space. Now, one of our core differentiators with Insight IDR is we have a number of different pre-built user behavior and also attacker behavior analytics so that the team can start to get value out of solution immediately. With Insight IDR and Insight Connect both being hosted on the Insight platform, this provides customers with a fast time to value experience with deploying your Insight solutions. Additionally, Insight IDR customers can start to leverage custom alerts to detect specific patterns, the acceleration of patterns, and then also the absence of specific user and attacker patterns to then start to escalate through a number of different sources. Not only can you start to escalate user, attacker, and also custom alerts through a number of different email, PagerDuty, Slack notifications, but also you can start to escalate your alerts over into the Rapid7 SOAR solution Insight Connect to start to customize your response. But the next place that we're going to hop into is the automation tab. Within Insight IDR today, there's a number of different pre-built workflows that the team can start to leverage. After deploying the Insight agent and the Insight orchestrator, teams can start to use pre-built workflows that require no customization to start to see value with automation immediately. However, if teams are leveraging custom Insight Connect workflows, they can also start to automatically trigger those workflows from creating an alert trigger within Insight IDR. This enables the team to have very specific control over how certain UBA alerts are beginning to execute into Insight Connect. Now, let's go ahead and take a dive into an investigation and see some of the details that IDR was able to detect for us. Within this specific investigation, it appears that a number of different users have reached out to a suspicious-looking domain. If we look in the investigation timeline, not only can we start to see some of the notable behaviors that were detected, but also we can start to access the evidence from the logs that are being ingested within Insight IDR today. Not only does Insight IDR support a number of different third-party log sources, but also we start to leverage the foundational event sources for the UBA detections within Insight IDR as well. The first step to proceeding with an investigation, we can start to look at leveraging some of our pre-built enrichment workflows. Here we're going to leverage a workflow that will begin to process indicators of compromise and look them up within a number of different open source threat intel. After selecting the workflow, we can see a summation of the steps that are currently built out in the existing workflow. And next, we can start to select the specific domains that we would like to attribute over into this enrichment automation and begin to take action. In our IDR timeline, we'll start to see the milestone for the automation that's kicked off, but we can also start to leverage the information that Insight Connect is starting to generate for us automatically by pressing the View Details tab. It looks like our job is already finished up, And here in our artifacts, we can start to see a summary on our findings. So for each domain, it looks like the first yielded no results. However, our anonymous domain did in fact pull back some results around this being a registered domain on Google and some specific information around server and contact information. All of this data is being generated within an Insight Connect job. If we view in the all output of the job, we can start to see the specific data that was brought in from the Insight IDR alert into our automated workflow. For our domain loop, we can start to see the specific information that was generated from whois on our domain that was brought over. If we click on the Information tab, we'll get a summary of the Insight Connect plugin that was used for the enrichment source. Now, if we hop back over into the IDR investigation, we can see the success milestone letting us know that our workflow completed successfully. Rapid7 SOAR solution Insight Connect integrates with over 300 different plugin sources to help you automate processes, not only in your incident response program, but also vulnerability management, IT, and various other capabilities as well. If we toggle this over into Insight Connect and select plugins, we can start to see a number of the different plugins that are built out and supported today by the Insight Connect integrations team. Also, featured here in the Rapid7 extensions library, we can start to see the pre-built workflow templates that are available within Insight Connect today. If I go ahead and pull up Insight IDR, this will also bring up a number of different workflow templates that are readily available for me to start to use to complement my IDR deployment, reducing the amount of time that it takes me to actually get my automations up and running. Also, Rapid7 supports a Discuss community where you can start to interact with a number of our different customers and also engineers today. But if we hop back over into the investigation, I think we have a few more tasks to complete our triage. Now that we've gone ahead and looked up some of our domains in Threat Intel, what I want to understand is who's actually interacted with some of these domains before. So if we go back to select our workflows, we can continue forward. And now we'll start to leverage our query spear phishing URL workflow. And this will enable us to start to query for information on who's interacted with our domain. So we'll pass over the domain in question. We'll take action. And now we can start to see our Insight Connect query for spear phishing URL being processed in the investigation. If we jump over to the All Output tab, we can watch the current job execute as it gets processed. If we jump into the first investigation, a few details that we can start to see is the input that was brought in for the query action into the IDR log set. So we queried for our anonymous domain. In our output, we can see generated some results. If we jump over to the other domain that we passed in, it looks like there wasn't any activity found within the past few days. If we jump up to our artifacts, we can start to see some of the information that was yielded from this lookup. So if we check this out, it looks like users Justin Timberlake, Gwen Stefani, as well as Nick Carter did in fact click a suspicious looking link. Now that we understand the context around our threat intelligence and also the interaction from our users, it's probably safe to say that we can start to take action and start to contain some of these user accounts that interacted with our suspicious domain. Again, if you want to take the action button, we can go back up into our workflows, select our Insight Connect options, and this is where we could have automatically had this workflow configure to start to escalate this alert over into a ChatOps solution and contain our user accounts. If I take this action, What this workflow will actually go ahead and do is post out a response within Slack. If I jump over to my Slack instance, I can see information around, looks like Justin Timberlake was associated, so I'll disable him. Once that action was successful, I will get an update in the Slack feed. I'll select that I want to continue to contain Gwen Stefani. Again, confirm my update. And lastly, confirm that I want to disable my account Nick Carter and confirm that's successful. Now that my accounts are disabled successfully, I can start to continue forward with investigating this alert before I continue forward with reverting back actions and improve the business continuity aspect of my incident response cycle. My biggest highlight with containment workflows, it is always a smart approach to start to automate reversing your containment actions. If you do get to that business continuity step and you decide that maybe these 3 user accounts are on a business trip in a suspicious location where they're clicking a domain, you can start to revert that change by, again, taking action, going back over into your workflows, continuing forward. And now you can select that you want to revert your action back by enabling your user accounts. After we select the 3 accounts and take action, we can start to see some of the decisions that are waiting for us to be responded to. This is leveraging a human decision within an Insight Connect workflow. The beauty of automation is the team can start to select how you would ideally like to interact with your automation solution, whether that be using a human decision point within the Insight solutions or by escalating your alerts via email or chat op solutions with Slack or Microsoft Teams. Here for my human decision, I'll select that I do in fact want to re-enable my user accounts. We'll be able to see our job continue to process through. Additionally, our decisions will be tracked within a decision tab. Our decision tab acts as an audit trail to confirm username and timestamps around decisions that are being made. Also, automated decisions are tracked within the decision tab as well. Now that I've reached my final decision that I want to re-enable my last user account, I can exit out of this job and I can wait for this job to finish running in my investigation. Now that I've finished re-enabling my Active Directory user accounts, this use case should have walked you through the entire incident response cycle, from receiving our Insight IDR investigation, from our visibility running off of the user behavior, attack behavior, and custom detection alerts, but also the development of how we can start to leverage automation to look up, correlate, respond, and re-enable potentially compromised user accounts, as well as look up suspicious domains. The next investigation we're going to take a look at is going to be centered around a user account reaching out to a suspicious looking IP. Here in our investigation, we can see a few different types of detections that were noted. So, of course, the next piece that we're going to go ahead and do is start to take action with Insight Connect. We'll select our custom Insight Connect workflows. And the next thing that we're going to start to leverage is the capability to start to block some of these addresses on Palo Alto. We'll continue forward, and now we'll just simply take action. The next piece that I'm going to go ahead and do is jump over to our Insight Connect solution and run you through what this is going to look like from the Insight Connect lens. Within Insight Connect, there are 3 core pillars. First, workflows are going to be the processes that you're going to be automating with your technologies. Second is going to be plugins. Plugins are going to be the technologies that we're going to be integrating with in your environment, but also Insight Connect supports utility plugins. Utility plugins can be general or very specific technical tasks that can help you throughout automating your processes. Lastly, the third pillar for Insight Connect is jobs. Here we can see we've reached a decision for our block host workflow to decide if we would ideally want to block this IP on the firewall or dismiss the alert. For demonstration purposes, I'll select that I ideally want to block the IP and submit my decision. Also, teams can start to assign jobs to themselves or view more details on the job in our inbox view. The last piece of this workflow, if we jump over to the Decisions tab, it looks like we did in fact block our IP on the firewall, and this was successful. So now we can start to understand if we would ideally want to close this investigation. Now, what I'll go ahead and do for investigation handling purposes is I'll select to close the investigation and submit my decision. After this workflow is completed successfully, we should see that update within the UI. Now, if we want to see what this workflow looks like in its builder view, we can jump over into workflows, and here I'll select my block host with Palo Alto PAN-OS workflow. Every single workflow has a control panel view, so team members can understand its purpose, key features, any requirements, and then also the value that you can start to drive off of it. Additionally, if you would like to change any parameters for your workflow, you can start to define workflow parameters by selecting which different type of block groups you would ideally want to start to push blocks within. Teams can leverage as many workflow parameters in your workflow to help you define how dynamic you would ideally want it to be. Let's go ahead and jump into this builder and see what this workflow looks like. Every single Insight Connect workflow begins off of a trigger action. For our block host workflow, we can see that we're leveraging the IDR trigger. If we publish this into edit view, we can jump into that trigger action, press previous. And now you can see a number of the different Insight platform trigger actions that we've discussed today. Specifically for Insight IDR user behavior alerts, as well as Insight IDR custom alerts, and even Insight VM events. Continuing forward with this process, after we receive our IDR alert, we're going to begin to extract out the IPs that are associated. We'll review each IP. First decision point is we'll confirm whether that IP is an internal or an external IP. If the IP is in fact external, that's where we reach our human decision point, where we can select whether we want to ideally start to update and block this IP on the firewall, or if the team just wants to dismiss this alert because it looks like a false positive. Not only can Insight Connect integrate with a number of different third-party integrations, such as Palo Alto, but also Insight Connect supports a number of different Rapid7 plugins to start to make changes within Insight IDR, Insight VM, and a number of our other Insight solutions. However, after we've gone ahead and created a new address object within Palo Alto to apply the block, Insight Connect would add that address object to the block group. Every single Insight Connect action is built in with a meta success step. So also teams can start to build in success logic to your workflows to ensure confidence as you start to adopt using automation into your daily processes. After understanding if our block action was successful, the next thing that we're going to go ahead and do is start to give the user an option whether they want to close the investigation or not. If we do, we'll go ahead and close the investigation and continue on to the next alert. The last workflow I want to cover for the SOC automation story is centered around containing assets. Now, as teams have seen, we can certainly start to escalate changes off of Insight IDR trigger actions. But Insight Connect supports a number of different trigger actions as well. For our last use case, I'm going to demonstrate how teams can start to manage assets through a chat-up solutions like Slack. Here, in our quarantine endpoint with the Rapid7 Insight Agent workflow, we can start to see some of our control panel highlights. A few examples for how to execute this workflow can be found in our control panel, as well as the requirements and setup around technical details. If we jump into the builder view of this specific workflow, we can start to see the trigger action is centered around our Slack chatbot. Also, teams can start to execute a very similar process off of Microsoft Teams as well. Because Insight Connect supports a number of different pre-built integrations, there's a lot of different ways that you can start to execute processes. Again, continuing forward with this workflow, after we've received our Slack trigger action, the next thing that we're going to go ahead and do is just update you that we have in fact received the request from Slack. Next, the Insight Connect workflow will start to extract out the agent ID so we can look up agent details and confirm if we're able to effectively find it. If we are able to identify the specific agent, the next thing that the workflow will prompt is if we would ideally want to quarantine or unquarantine the asset. This is an automated decision driven off of your Slack command. Next, the workflow will continue with updating you whether the quarantine was successful or not. Let's hop over into Slack and see what this looks like. First, we'll tag the Rapid7 Insight Connect chatbot and pass in the commands that we want to quarantine the endpoint. Next, the team can pass in either the IP or the name of the actual workstation and execute our command. Here we can see the workflow updating us that our request has in fact been received. And the asset's been quarantined. Now that's just one example of how teams can start to leverage automation within the Insight platform as well as without. To reverse changes, very simply, copy your previous command, add the option to unquarantine, and start to remove isolation through ChatOps. Not only does automating through ChatOps improve visibility, but also can start to reduce the amount of time that it takes to get assets, users, and even access to sites back online. We thank you for joining us for this presentation on Insight Connect, as well as Insight IDR, Rapid7 SOC automation solutions, working together to close the security achievement gap for our customers.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really hope that you enjoyed hearing about SOC automation here at Rapid7. If you'd like to learn more or try Insight Connect or Insight IDR for yourself, we've included some links here where you can learn more about each solution as well as sign up for a 30-day trial. And so now we can move on to some Q&A and answer those questions that came in throughout the presentation.
That sounds great. We have a number of questions that have come in, actually. Let's start with, in fact, before we get started, though, I'm going to put up a poll question, and we'll wrap up with another slide before we get done here. But what additional information would the audience like about the Rapid7 solution? We want to make sure that we get them what they're looking for from Rapid7. So the first question is, how well does SOC work for small companies?
So I can answer that question. So it would somewhat depend on your goal and what your eventual outcome is. If you're planning on expanding your program and hiring more people, because usually when I think small companies, I think of teams of 1 to 3. Or maybe 1, usually, depending on the organization that you're in. So if you're going to expand, do something like a hybrid SOC model, if you're looking for, like a managed service provider, one of the things that I always say is, look at the governance structure, look at the check-ins, look at how they're going to manage that relationship. Because what you don't want is just having alerts being thrown over the fence and you having to do more work. So it's almost like you're getting a SOC or a managed service provider, and then to reduce some of that debt that you have to pay, but yet you're adding in a different kind of debt to have to manage them. So it can get weird. I would just say there's definitely use for it in small companies. I've implemented a managed MSSP relationship in as little as 50 employees. If you're talking about an internal SOC, that's a whole separate conversation, which gets into a lot of complexities. You're looking at like 8 to 12 people to really have a good, working a Panama schedule. But for an internal SOC for a small company, I don't think the value is there just in terms of the monetary investment, upkeep, and infrastructure. But for a managed relationship, absolutely any day of the week. Yeah.
No, there's actually a good follow-on question to that, I guess. I mean, if it's basically who should be thinking about SOC automation and when is the right time to think about it?
So who should be thinking about it? Everybody. When is the right time? Yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, it's just kind of like the way that it's just a way of how you mentally think through things. Like the programs that I've always tried to stand up in the past, the end game is always, at the end of the day, you should really be only dealing with edge cases of things. So if throughout your workday, one of the first things that I did when we kicked off this is had all my guys record everything they were doing more than once for a week, which is a lot of paperwork and a lot of extra stuff. At the end of the week, we all got together and like, I didn't realize I was doing this every day, like multiple times a day, because it just becomes so ingrained and so part of the workflow that you kind of forget everything that you do so often. And it's like, you should be automating all of that. If you're doing it more than once and you're doing it, more than on a daily basis, like just automate it, just get it out of the way. Because eventually you're going to find that like that gets you out of firefighting mode and it gets you into a mode where you can actually start looking at postural improvements. And then as you start making those improvements, it just becomes this cycle where the more you improve, the less you're in firefighting mode. And then you get this nice steady state, hopefully you get to this nice steady state where really you're more working with the business than you are working in consoles and helping to help the business drive forward at their speed, not your speed.
Got it. Before we continue, we do have a poll question up on the screen for the audience to answer if you haven't seen it yet. Please take a minute to let us know how you'd like to hear more. This is a good question. It's from Phil, and it's one that a lot of executives like pretty charts, right? Does your product have a dashboard that can be shared with senior leadership to show your overall risk posture and emerging threats in a way that's probably easily consumable?
It absolutely does. And we're going to be making more improvements to dashboarding and reporting in the next month or so. So current state, absolutely it does. It's pretty easy to use. You can build it off of pre-built queries or kind of build it out manually as you're going. We've built dashboards. Well, I, in past lives, have built dashboards around PCI compliance, around HIPAA and high trust compliance. So it's all there and it's really easy to use. So short answer, absolutely.
There's a question here from Lewis. I'm just going to paraphrase a little bit. Is what's the best way to sort of get started and evaluate Insight IDR?
I'm gonna let Sid handle that one.
Yeah, of course. There's a few different links that we incorporated in the follow-up, and we'll make sure to get those over to everybody as well. And there's a few different trials that you can sign up for. Pretty simple, rapid7.com/try, and then you can select the product that you'd ideally like to trial. That's for Insight IDR or Insight Connect or any other Rapid7 solution. We do have available free trials for you today. So certainly that would be a fantastic next step that I'd highly recommend.
Excellent. We have another question. For teams not currently leveraging a SOAR solution, what are some good places for them to start thinking about implementing automation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Some of the few things that I'd call out is take a look at your tech stack. And when you take a look at your tech stack, that's going to let you understand kind of the building blocks and all the different options you have to play with automation per se, because ultimately you're going to be integrating with that tech. But I think when you're getting started, a lot of really fantastic use cases you can begin with is enrichment or correlation gathering. So those first few use cases that we talked about in the demonstration, alert enrichment doesn't just have to be from your SIM. Alert enrichment can be coming from your EDR solution. Alert enrichment could be enriching alerts coming from a third party that you may have, or a managed provider that you may be getting alerts from. Also, context gathering, so being able to query back, understand, the behavior around that suspicious user account, the suspicious asset, the actual suspicious IP or indicator in question, I think is also a really great way to start off automation. Essentially, the reason why is because those automated use cases don't make changes in your environment. They just simply fetch you more information. And those are some really great starting areas.
This is a good question because it's one that I'm sure that a lot of organizations face. And it's What advice would you share for teams that are trying to make the case for budget to expand their automation capabilities in this area?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I'm actually going to have Jeff answer that one because he has actually done this before. Jeff, do you mind taking that one?
Yeah, no, it all kind of goes back into, like I said, risk and cost. So, really getting some of those data points if you can. For example, when you're investigating things, how often are you investigating? How many times do they end up being a true positive? How many times do they end up being a false positive? How many user requests are you coming in? How long does it take for an investigation to complete, both from, and from like literally soup to nuts. So from the time that you get an alert to opening up tickets to recovering from lessons learned, all of it. And then you can start applying, dollars and cents to it, and how, what your current risk register looks like, and tying that all together. Because really, when you're trying to convince an executive, sadly, like best practices and things of that nature don't matter to a CFO or really to a board. What they care about is dollars and cents and risk. And if you can even better tie risk to dollars and cents, that makes it even better. And also throw in, if you're dealing with the legal eagles out there, if you can tie it to diligence and incorporate the phrase due diligence in there, you will really get people's ears to perk up. For example, like, we look at, we have to look at over 100 alerts a day that come in. We only are able to investigate 25 of them. We're not able to, do our due diligence in keeping track of all the alerts coming into our environment, and therefore blah, 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 blah. That'll get people's ears up and going, all right, we need to invest more in this.
Got it. Okay, so this is kind of a long question, so bear with me. All other considerations being equal, is the value prop for SOC automation of similar value for office-based teams or organizations as it could be for decentralized or hybrid teams and organizations? Basically, probably a in-office versus remote question.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit early on this year, we never would have expected that automation could have helped bring teams together. It just wasn't something that we didn't realize at the time. But then as workforce started to move into this like remote state, a lot of people started to look at using automation to bring alerts together into ChatOps solutions. So with everybody working out of ChatOps solutions, really, there was this pivotal change of getting those alerts into something that was more relevant to teams. So absolutely, I kind of like the example that I showed in the demonstration. Not only can you automate processes within Rapid7 solutions like Insight IDR, but another really popular strategy is to automate processes outside of your solution. So into things like ChatOps. So you can customize commands and leverage better control without ever even having to sign into your infrastructure or your technologies.
Here's a really good, a great question. What's the learning curve?
Yeah, of course. That's a fantastic question. Of course, to be candid, every single product has a learning curve. But rest assured, we have advisors that help meet with our customers, not only to help you really plan out your automation project, but to also help you get started from the ground up. We have customer-facing workshops where we actually invite customers to teach them how to do very specific things with Insight Connect. But also, we do support services as well. Our services model can be broken up with an hour or two with a consultant every single week for the amount of time that you purchase. So also there's a number of different ways that we help customers get up and running with these solutions as fast as possible.
And I'll throw in 2 cents, putting on the old customer hat, which I haven't worn in a while. But the pre-built workflows, some of the guidance that you get when you first log into the product of, hey, start here, try this, and it's all very visual. It's not like it's not like you're diving into an IDE and you're going to have to learn another language on top of the ones that you may already know. It's very easy to use. So like Sid said, there's going to be a learning curve in terms of, interface and how things work, where to go for what, but that's pretty much it. It's not like you're going to have to learn, Golang or something else to actually make this work,
We're going to ask one more question, and I think it's a good one because it's a sector that needs a lot of help. Is your product being used in educational institutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I have the proper creds in place or I guess legal language aside to actually list out these customers' names, but rest assured, we do have a number of different universities currently using Insight Connect and our existing customers. Those universities span not only inside the United States, but also outside as well.
Sounds good. Thank you, team, so much for this great presentation. I know our audience enjoyed it based on what I'm seeing in the comments and questions, and it was incredibly informative. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah,
And we have
thank you.
one final very important thing to do, which is to give away a $300 Amazon gift card. And that is going to go to Amanda Sikirky from New Jersey. Amanda will be reaching out to you after the event with information on how to collect your winnings. As always, we thank the audience for joining us for today's event. We thank Rapid7 for sponsoring today's event, and hope everyone has a healthy and safe rest of the whatever, year, month, day, whatever. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you.